Hi, I'm Callista. I buried my husband overseas, alone. Grief still clinging to my coat like winter rain. When I texted my family to pick me up from the airport, they told me to get an Uber. My mom said I was bothering people. My sister said they were busy. No one came. But that night, they turned on the TV, and what they saw made their hands shake. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from right now? And has your family ever made you feel completely disposable? Because mine did. And this is the story they never thought I'd survive to tell. The wheels of the plane touched down with a soft thud, but it felt like my entire body jolted. I had barely slept in 20 hours. The recycled cabin air still clung to my skin. I blinked slowly as the seatbelt sign turned off, and people around me began to unbuckle, chatter, stretch, stand. I stayed seated for a moment longer. My right hand gripped the handle of my carry-on. My left rested on the small wooden box on my lap. Inside it, my husband's ashes. I'd wrapped it in a navy cloth with tiny white flowers, something he used to wear as a handkerchief in his pocket. He would have laughed at the thought of ending up in it. When I finally stood, it felt like I had aged a decade during that flight. My legs were stiff, my shoulders sore, my chest hollow. I moved with the current of passengers through the jet bridge, eyes on the floor, body on autopilot. Customs was a blur. The officer barely glanced at me. I mumbled my answers. No, nothing to declare. Yes, I'm a U.S. citizen, traveling alone. Reason? Returning from a funeral? His eyes flicked to the box. He didn't ask. As I passed the final sliding doors of Dulles Airport, a gust of humid August air greeted me. Washington, D.C. In late summer was always thick. Everything felt heavier. The handle of my suitcase dug into my fingers. I adjusted my grip, shifting the box slightly. The cloth felt warm now, almost like it had a pulse. I stopped near the exit, pulled out my phone, and opened the family group chat. Flight lands at 3 p.m. Can someone pick me up? I hit send, and waited. The crowd moved around me, chauffeurs holding signs, kids waving at grandparents, couples kissing. A woman next to me squealed when she spotted her husband. He ran up, lifted her off the ground. People clapped. I looked back down at my screen. Still nothing. A minute passed. Then another. Ding. Margot. We're busy. Try Uber. That stupid smiley face. I stared at it, not quite believing it was real. Then, as if on cue, another message. Dad. You should have planned better. Followed by Mom. Don't bother other people. My heart didn't sink. It just paused, like it was too tired to react. I read the messages again, slower this time, as if maybe I'd misread. But no. The screen glowed in my hand. I typed back. No worries. That was it. 2 words. I couldn't bring myself to say anything more. I lowered the phone, slid it into my purse, and kept walking. No tears, not yet. Just the tap of my heels echoing across polished tile, growing louder than the murmur of voices around me. Each step felt like I was dragging something unseen. I passed the terminal Starbucks, past the newsstand. The smell of cinnamon pretzels and cheap coffee made my stomach turn. I hadn't eaten since Seoul. Outside, I spotted a bench near the curb. Not one of those metal ones people sit on for a quick rest. This one looked forgotten. Tucked behind a pillar, slightly rusted, I walked over and sat down. The suitcase leaned against my knee, and the urn sat quietly beside me. I watched the cars pull in and out, families piling into minivans, friends waving, balloons, laughter, and me, sitting there with a suitcase full of wrinkled black clothes and a box that used to be a person. I thought about my wedding. how my parents didn't come because it was overseas. They'd called it selfish, said it wasn't fair to expect them to fly that far just for a ceremony. Even then, Margot had sided with them. "It's not personal," she said. "They just don't like complicated stuff." And Mom, I could still hear her voice, cold and matter-of-fact. "Why marry a man with health issues? You'll end up a widow before you're 40. She wasn't wrong. He was gone by 39. I gripped the edge of the bench, grounding myself. I wouldn't cry, not here, not now. My phone buzzed again, not them this time, just a notification from the airline. "Thank you for flying with us." I let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Sure." I opened my rideshare app. My thumb hovered over the screen. Lyft, Uber, black car, economy. All of it blurred. I could order a ride, pretend none of this stung, pretend I hadn't just been dismissed like a burden. Instead, I slid my wallet from my purse and pulled out a small, pale green card. On it, in careful handwriting, was an address: Tranquility Cottage, Maple Valley. Underneath, a phone number. I dialed. It rang twice before a calm voice answered. "This is Gerald." "Hi," I said quietly. "It's Callista. I'm ready for pickup. Just like we discussed." There was a pause. Then, "I'm on my way." I hung up, tucked the phone away, and glanced once more at the bench beside me, the space where someone might have sat. Then I looked at the box. "You're coming home with me," I whispered. I stood up, smoothed the front of my blouse, and pulled the suitcase upright. A dark-colored sedan approached the curb slowly, the kind you wouldn't notice unless you were looking. The back door opened. I stepped in. Moved without a sound through winding forest roads, the kind that always felt like they belonged in a storybook. Dense trees arched above us, their leaves already shifting into early shades of rust and gold. Afternoon light filtered through, casting broken beams across the narrow path. I kept one hand on the box in my lap, the other resting against the door, watching the world blur past in amber silence. "Welcome back," Gerald had said the moment I stepped in. Just 2 words, but they settled deep in my chest. He didn't ask questions. He never did. That was part of the reason Hyun had trusted him. We drove in silence for a long time. A comfortable quiet. No traffic, no horns, no chatter. Just the gentle hum of the engine and the soft crunch of gravel when the tires rolled off the pavement. Eventually, the trees opened up. The cottage emerged like a whisper among the woods, tucked back, half covered in ivy, its chimney stretching toward the sky like it had something to say, but had waited too long. Gerald pulled up slowly and parked beside the stone steps. I stepped out, the wood box still in my arms. The air smelled of pine and something faintly sweet, maybe wildflowers, maybe memory. My shoes crunched over fallen leaves as I made my way to the door. There was no key under the mat, no lockbox on the side. I reached into the inside pocket of my coat and pulled out a brass key with a blue ribbon tied to it. The original. Hyun had given it to me the day before his last surgery. "Just in case," he'd said with a tired smile. "If things go sideways, you'll know when to use it." The lock turned with a soft click. I pushed the door open. It was exactly as I remembered. And not at all. Dust floated lazily in golden streaks of sunlight. The living room smelled faintly of cedar. Worn leather chairs sat facing the fireplace. A wool blanket was still folded neatly at the edge of the couch, untouched. The kitchen to the left was quiet, everything in place. Plates stacked. Coffee mugs lined up like sentries. This wasn't a rental. It was home. I walked in slowly, rolling my suitcase behind me, the sound of the wheels muffled by the hardwood floor. I set the urn on the mantel above the fireplace, right in the center. It felt right. The box was small, but somehow it filled the entire room. I lit a candle beside it, unscented, plain, white. The flame flickered gently, as if acknowledging him. Across from the mantel was a canvas on the wall, half finished. A painting of the two of us at Lake Louise. Hyun had started it on our last trip. The water was done, shimmering blues and greens. My hair was there, loose and dark, wind-blown. But his face, it was just an outline, like he hadn't quite decided how to finish it. I stepped closer, reached out, and let my fingers brush the dry paint. "I'm here," I whispered. A lump formed in my throat but didn't rise any higher. I stood there for a while. I don't know how long. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe 30. Time didn't move in the cottage the way it did everywhere else. Eventually, I walked to the hallway and turned into the study. It was just as we'd left it, except for one drawer on the far wall. It was locked. I knelt down, pulled the same brass key from my coat, and unlocked it. Inside, a laptop, a cheap flip phone, and a thick navy blue folder. I sat cross-legged on the rug, the folder heavy in my lap. "Let's begin," I murmured. The laptop turned on without a fuss. No password screen, just a simple desktop with 3 folders arranged neatly: family fund records, power of attorney audio recordings, each one named by Hyun, each one exactly where it needed to be. He never trusted my family, and honestly, neither did I. But he had always been quiet about it, polite even, until that last year. That was when he started recording things, conversations, contracts, phone calls. "Just in case," he said again and again. I opened the family fund records folder first. My father's name stared back at me from the screen, dozens of documents tracing fake charitable contributions, shady transfers, slush accounts, and worst of all, forged authorizations, some in my name. They'd used my SSN to authorize a donation of over $80,000 to a shell nonprofit that conveniently hired Margot's husband as a consultant. All of it tucked neatly under the umbrella of the Jernigan Family Foundation, my family's pride and joy, their golden badge of virtue. Hyun had found it all. The phone buzzed beside me. I picked it up. A burner line, the one Hyun had said to use when the time came. One contact saved under Mr. Salazar. I typed a single message: "Confirm meeting time." "I'll bring everything." I sat there in the quiet for a moment, my finger hovering over the send button. Then I tapped. Message delivered. I leaned back against the wall and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The wind outside rustled through the trees, a sound I used to find comforting. Ding. My main phone lit up. A news alert. Local Family Foundation honored for community giving, featuring the Jernigan family. I stared at the headline, jaw tight. The article's thumbnail showed my parents, Margot, and her husband standing in front of a podium, hands clasped, grinning like saints. My mother wore that pearl necklace she only pulled out for events where cameras would be present. My father looked 10 pounds thinner and 20 pounds smugger. I didn't tap to read more. Instead, I closed the laptop, stood, and walked back to the living room. The candle was still burning beside the urn. I glanced at it, then out the window. Evening was beginning to settle in. And the trees cast long shadows. The temperature dipped slightly, just enough to make me pull my sleeves down. I sat on the couch and looked at the quiet room around me. They thought I was just drifting, that I had no plan, no power, no spine, that I would land at Dulles, order a car, drag my suitcase back to some friend's spare room, and disappear like a stray. But I wasn't drifting. This cottage was never just for grieving. It was the beginning of something they couldn't see coming. I stared at the news headline, then calmly whispered, "Let's see how generous they are when the truth comes out." The silence in the room settled like dust. I didn't move for a long time. I just sat there at the dining table in my cottage, watching the morning light creep across the hardwood floor inch by inch, as if even the sun was cautious about what came next. I finally stood. My movements were precise, intentional. I opened the window slightly to let in the cool Maple Valley breeze, then walked to the kitchen counter where a small stack of documents waited. I ground the beans slowly, the scent of dark roast grounding me, and poured the hot water over. No rush. Strategy needed a clear head. On the table sat a thick envelope labeled in Hyun's careful handwriting. Trust Docs. My fingers hovered over it. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I ran my thumb across the corner, feeling the indentation where he'd pressed too hard with the pen. It made my heart ache in the most unexpected way. I opened the envelope. Inside were color-coded dividers, just like he used for everything. I found the yellow legal folder, marked in my own writing from a month ago, Jernigan Foundation, fraud evidence. Inside were years of receipts, wire transfer logs, and something new I hadn't reviewed yet, a copy of a fake ledger for a charity that never existed. I recognized the signature at the bottom. Raina's husband, Derek, treasurer, supposedly. I leaned back in the chair, the floor creaking beneath me. That's when the memory hit me. A family dinner in New York, 2 years before Hyun passed. We were at my parents' brownstone, eating off plates that cost more than my monthly rent back then. Raina was holding court at the far end of the table, wine in hand, laughing about how exhausting it is to be the treasurer of the Jernigan Family Foundation. She said it like it was a burden, not the privilege it actually was. My parents looked so proud. My mother turned to me and said, "See? That's how you contribute to a family legacy. Not everyone can understand money at that level." Then my father added with a smile that cut like a blade, "You don't have the mind for numbers, darling. You're more emotional." Hyun, seated beside me, didn't say anything. But under the table, his hand reached for mine, gave it the lightest squeeze. That small gesture saved me that night. Another time, I had offered to help with the legal filings for the foundation. I had just finished a certification in nonprofit compliance. But before I could finish my sentence, my mother shut me down. "You don't belong in that world," she said, as if I was some stranger they barely tolerated. No one defended me, not Raina, not even Derek, who had smiled politely, then changed the subject. I was always the one left out, the fringe daughter, the emotional one. The one who went overseas, who disappeared, who wasn't missed. Now I was back, and I was done staying silent. I turned toward my laptop, opened the secured folder labeled Stage 1, and typed out a brief email to Mr. Salazar. Just facts. Concise. The investigator would arrive within 48 hours. I included a voice file as an attachment. It was Raina's voice, clear as daylight. She was laughing, bragging to someone about how easy it was to massage foundation money into Derek's real estate holdings. "As long as no one asks questions," she giggled. "It's basically free money." Time-stamped. Crystal clear. I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. "You said I wasn't useful. Let's see how useless this is." Then came the part I dreaded, the memory I tried not to revisit. After Hyun died, I flew back to the States because my family insisted on planning a memorial. "It's just a small thing," my sister had said. "Let us handle it." "You've had a long journey." I should have known. It was held in the backyard of their summer home, catered with bland hors d'oeuvres and cheap sparkling wine. No one asked about Korea. No one asked about Hyun's final weeks. My mother introduced me to guests as, "Callista, she's between things right now." Between what? Grief and rage? They showed a slideshow. Photos of Hyun smiling at family barbecues from 10 years ago, group shots from holidays, but none of the ones I'd taken while caring for him through his illness, none of us in the hospice, none from Korea. Then Derek stood, glass raised. "To strong women," he said, "and the men who deserve better." The guests chuckled. I didn't. I walked away without a word. That silence burned deeper than any scream. Back in the present, I placed the yellow folder back into the envelope, then pulled out another stack of printed documents, this time in triplicate. I labeled each set. One would go to Mr. Salazar's law office. The second, I addressed to the board of the Jernigan Foundation with the word urgent written in red ink across the top. The third, I placed it in a fireproof lockbox beneath the floorboard near my writing desk. As I sealed the lid, I paused and whispered into the dim space beneath the wood. They built their empire on lies. And this is the match. I stood, dusted off my hands, and checked the time. 5:47 p.m. Just enough daylight left to drive to the courier drop-off. I grabbed my coat, slipped the envelope into my satchel, and headed for the door. Before I stepped out, I glanced back at the framed photo of Hyun and me from our last trip to Busan, his smile faint but genuine. "Let's light it up," I murmured. The last envelope, then dialed the one number they never thought I'd use. It rang twice before a calm, authoritative voice answered. "Mallory Grange?" "Hi, Mallory, it's Callista." There was a pause, then warmth. "Callista, I was hoping I'd hear from you. Hyun, he made me promise. If you ever called, I'd answer." I swallowed the weight pressing against my chest. "I have something for you, something he started before he passed." She didn't ask how I was, didn't coddle me with sympathy. That's why I called her. I didn't want pity. I needed firepower. I told her everything. The shell charities, the ghost foundations, the real estate purchases in Reina's name, funded through anonymous donations, the digital voice file, the documents Hyun left behind. Mallory listened without interrupting. Her silence was surgical. When I finally stopped talking, there was another pause. Then she said, "He always knew they'd try to bury you." His exact words were, "If anything happens, Callista will need someone who believes her, someone who's not afraid to dig." I closed my eyes for a second, exhaling slowly. I remembered Hyun's voice, low and steady, as we sat in that cold hospital lounge one winter night in Seoul. He'd just finished a round of chemo. We were alone. No monitors, no machines, just two people holding hands in the quiet. "I started looking into them," he had whispered, eyes barely open. "I know you don't want to see it, but they're not just cruel. They're careful, which makes them dangerous." I remember looking at him, confused. "Why now?" "Because your loyalty blinds you," he said gently. "But I won't let them win. Not when they treat you like you're disposable. You're not. You're everything." Now, sitting in my cottage across the ocean from that moment, I whispered, "You never stopped protecting me." Mallory's voice brought me back. "I'll take the case," she said. "But if we do this, we do it the right way. No shortcuts, no leaks." "I'm ready." That was the last thing I said before she outlined the first steps. A cease and desist letter would be filed within 48 hours. Her firm was initiating whistleblower protection protocol with the DOJ and IRS. Internal Revenue already had flagged suspicious activity from the Jernigan Foundation years ago. It just never went anywhere. Now, with hard evidence, it might. "Do not speak to anyone without me present," she instructed. "I'll have a new number couriered to you by morning, untraceable, secured. You'll use that line for all contact moving forward." I nodded, then realized she couldn't see me. "Understood. We'll also need you to sign an affidavit for the AG's office in New York." "I already signed it," I replied. "It's in the envelope I mailed you." There was a moment of silence, then a quiet laugh. "Hyun always said you didn't waste time once you made up your mind." I didn't laugh back. "I wasted years trying to earn their love. Now," she said, "you're earning justice." We ended the call, and I sat still in my chair, the afternoon light fading behind the hills. The house creaked gently, as if exhaling with me. The fireproof box under my bed now held something far more dangerous than family secrets. It held evidence. That night, while I reviewed Mallory's legal reply letter, I opened my laptop. There it was. Raina's newest Facebook post, time-stamped an hour ago. A filtered photo of her in front of a mural, smiling with forced sincerity, arms crossed beside a giant novelty check for $250,000, made out to a school arts program. Caption: proud to give back through our family's foundation. #gratitude, #legacy building. I didn't click like. The comments were predictable. So inspiring, Raina. Love your heart. You and Derek are such generous souls. It took everything in me not to reply. Instead, I took a screenshot and saved it into a new folder. Public image versus reality. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. No drama, okay? Don't ruin Thanksgiving like last year. I stared at the words for a full minute. Then I deleted the message. No reply, no reaction, no space left for that kind of manipulation. By 11 p.m., the house was dark, save for the glow from my desk lamp. I stood up, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled down the lockbox. I placed the signed legal response from Mallory's firm inside, next to Hyun's folder. The label on the letter made me pause. To whom it may concern. This office now represents Ms. Callista Jernigan in all matters pertaining to Jernigan Foundation, Inc. I traced the name, my name, with my thumb. I remembered something Hyun used to say when we were younger, when I still believed family meant safety. They gave you silence, Callie. You don't owe them your voice. But tonight I wasn't staying silent. Tonight I whispered back to the empty room. They gave me silence. I'll return the favor, with consequences. Then I slid the lockbox back into place and locked it tight. I made tea, lit one candle, Hyun's candle, and sat beside the window, watching the quiet night settle in. Not from peace, but preparation for Hyun that night, and smiled, not from peace, but preparation. The next morning was crisp, the kind of autumn chill that nips at your skin even when the sun pretends to shine. I pulled on a dark coat, not because I needed the warmth, but because it gave me weight. I wanted to carry that kind of presence. The drive to Cherry Hill wasn't long, but it felt like miles of memory. Each street corner stirred some buried moment. The red brick elementary school where Raina had once pushed me into a bush and laughed. The old bakery, now a vape shop, where I used to save my allowance for cinnamon rolls no one ever remembered to buy for me. When I turned onto Sycamore Lane, my hands tightened around the wheel. The neighborhood hadn't changed. White shutters, leaf piles raked into neat borders, flags waving beside mailboxes. Idyllic, if you didn't know better. I parked at the curb. Never once did I consider pulling into the driveway. That space had always belonged to the important ones. Dad's SUV, Raina's shiny new Audi. I would not let my tires touch their asphalt. I stepped out slowly, heels crunching over dry leaves. The house stood tall, its colonial-style frame casting long shadows on the front lawn, pretty on the outside, just like everything else they curated, but inside, cold as ever. As I walked toward the door, I couldn't stop the flood. Flashes of my wedding day, Dad muttering about wasted money, Mom ignoring the tear on my dress while she fussed over Raina's corsage. I'd blinked those memories away for years, convinced myself they didn't matter. Today, I let them play. I knocked once. The door opened seconds later. My mother stood there, still in her pale robe, eyes sharp behind her morning makeup. "Well," she said, her smile brittle, "didn't you say you'd never come back?" I changed my mind. She stepped aside, not warmly, just enough for me to pass without brushing against her. The air inside was scented with lemon cleaner and cold judgment. "Did you call ahead?" she asked as I walked in. "No. That's typical." I made my way to the kitchen without waiting. It was spotless, as always, every surface polished, every bowl of fake fruit in place, a home curated for appearances. A floorboard creaked behind me. I turned to see my father enter, holding a beer like it was water. "If this is about money, we're not discussing it." "It's not about money," I said, placing a folder gently on the island countertop. Then came the sound I expected next. Raina's heels clicking down the stairs. She appeared in a soft, camel-colored wrap dress, hair blown out like she was expecting cameras. Her lips twisted into a smirk when she saw me. "Let me guess," she said, voice thick with sarcasm. "Here to ruin Thanksgiving again?" I didn't look at her. Not yet. I opened the folder and slid a printed letter across the island. "This is from my legal counsel. As of last Friday, I am no longer affiliated with the Jernigan Foundation. Any mention of my name, image, or likeness in your fundraising, branding, or media is a legal violation. The Foundation's tax status is also being reviewed. An audit is likely." The silence that followed was thick. Raina stepped closer and picked up the letter with trembling hands. "This is a joke," she muttered. "You're bluffing." My father's voice cracked like a whip. "What the hell is this, Callista?" I turned to him, steady. "It's protection. You've used me for the last time." My mother crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "You're making a scene." "No," I said, turning to face her now. "I'm ending one." Her eyes flicked over the letter. Her voice dropped an octave. "You're embarrassing yourself." I stared straight through her. "Don't text me again unless it's through your attorney." The room froze. No one spoke. I left the paper there on the counter and walked away, past the hallway with its curated family portraits. Most of them had been updated since I'd last visited. Smaller ones replaced by grand canvas prints, all pristine, until I noticed the gaps, photos where I'd been cropped out, group shots where only my shoulder remained. Even Hyun's wedding portrait, the one where I looked happiest, was gone. I pushed open the garage door. The air was musty and still, piles of old boxes, shelves cluttered with trophies Raina hadn't won but claimed anyway. And there, half buried beneath a bin labeled seasonal, I saw it. Hyun's wedding photo. The one with both of us grinning under soft string lights, our hands linked, caught mid-laugh. I picked it up carefully. The frame had cracked at one corner. Behind me, I heard the door open again. "It hurt to see it," my mother said quietly. "That's all. We didn't want the reminder." I turned to her. "It didn't hurt you. It hurt your image." She didn't deny it. I looked down at the photo again. Gently, I brushed off the dust with my sleeve, then tucked it under my arm. "I'm taking this," I said. "It doesn't belong here." As I walked back outside, the sun had shifted. The shadows on the lawn stretched farther than before. The front door creaked again behind me. Raina stood there now, arms crossed, watching me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You bought a Porsche with donation money," I said, calm as stone. "That's felony misappropriation." She flinched. I added, "I suggest you prepare." She tried to scoff. "You wouldn't." "You still think I'm the weak one," I said, stepping closer. She didn't have a response. I held her stare for a few seconds longer, then turned and walked toward my car. As I got in, I looked in the rearview mirror. Raina was still on the porch, but this time her arms had dropped, and her expression was no longer smug. I didn't drive off right away. I let the engine hum beneath me, feeling the quiet pulse of power returning to my hands. They used to tell me I was dramatic, too emotional, too sensitive. No one says that to a cease and desist letter. As I finally pulled away from the curb, I felt nothing like the girl who once cried in that same driveway. I didn't cry, but Raina did. I drove away, I didn't cry, but Raina did. By the time I reached Mallory's office downtown, the sun hadn't even cleared the skyline. A sliver of peach light broke between buildings, just enough to give the steel and glass a soft shimmer. The streets were still half asleep, like the city hadn't decided whether to be kind or cruel yet. I parked in the underground garage and made my way up the elevator, palms cool against the handle of my leather briefcase. Mallory was already there, seated behind her desk, her blazer still buttoned, hair slicked back in a low ponytail. The only sign she hadn't slept much was the faint purple smudge beneath her eyes and the silence she greeted me with. She nodded once. "Morning." I sat down, not bothering with pleasantries. "How bad is it?" She reached across her desk and slid a folder toward me, silver-tabbed, clean-lined, the kind she only used when something was serious. "They filed a temporary restraining order," she said, voice even. "On you," I snorted, a sharp, bitter sound. "Of course they did. They're claiming you've created a hostile environment by threatening to destabilize the foundation." She leaned back, folding her arms. "But I think you're going to want to see this." She pulled out a sealed envelope. Creamy cardstock. Hyun's handwriting on the front. I froze. "Is that?" She nodded. It was notarized 6 months before his passing. He gave it to me in case things went sideways. I took the envelope in both hands. My fingertips trembled as I opened it, the paper thick and slightly scented. He always used cedar-lined drawers. I started reading aloud, barely above a whisper. "Callista, if you're reading this, it means they made you fight harder than you should have. I'm sorry. I should have done more while I was alive, but I did what I could behind the curtain. 6 months ago, I amended everything. You are now sole executor of our joint properties, including the Soul Branch. If you ever need strength, borrow mine. Don't ask for permission. You never needed it. And if your family turns cold, remember this. You owe them nothing. Not love, not grace, not access to your life. Hyun." By the time I finished, my hands were damp, but I hadn't noticed until the letter fluttered slightly in my grip. Mallory didn't speak. She just waited, giving me the room to sit with it. I blinked quickly, swallowing the lump that had been growing behind my ribs. Then I folded the letter and placed it back into the envelope, smoothing the flap shut like a ritual. "I want to move now," I said. Mallory opened a different folder. "Good, because I've already started." We went to work. No ceremony, no dramatics, just 2 women in dark suits slinging back coffee and justice like it was our native language. First, we froze Raina's foundation credit accounts, cards she'd been using to fund her outreach events that were more about champagne and rented backdrops than any actual charity. Then we filed a report with the State Attorney General's office, misappropriation of donor funds, detailed, documented, unflinching. Next, we reclaimed the trademarks and IP connected to the educational programs I'd co-founded but had been quietly removed from, without notice, without my name, without so much as a thank you. Mallory filed motions for injunctive relief that morning. Fast, clean, unstoppable. It felt surgical, cold maybe, but necessary. I wasn't angry, I was done. And that was something far more dangerous. By late morning, I stepped out of her office, the light stronger now. Philadelphia was in full swing, cars honking, people shouting across streets, coffee cups clinking against lids. But I felt steadier. Like Hyun had drawn a circle of strength around me that no one else could touch. Back in Cherry Hill, the ripples began almost immediately. Mallory's assistant called to say several neighbors had already contacted my parents. "Just checking in," one of them had said. "Is everything okay with the foundation?" Their pastor canceled an upcoming community fundraiser, citing a need for internal reevaluation. And Raina? She posted a photo on her story, filtered sunlight across a wine glass, a barely legible caption beneath it. "Some people just love drama. No tag, no name, but everyone knew. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the letter in front of me, lit only by the pendant lamp above. I didn't reread it. I didn't need to. The words had etched themselves into me. I opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keys for just a moment before I typed the subject line. Formal separation, cease all communications. Effective immediately. In the body, I wrote only what was essential. No apologies, no explanation, no more bridges extended only to be burned. You forfeited your daughter. Do not contact me again. I hit send. Then, one by one, I blocked their numbers. Cell, landline, email, every channel of intrusion, cut off. The house went silent. I stood, stretched, and made myself a cup of tea. Steam rose slowly from the mug as I walked to the window, looking out into the quiet street. For once, my breath wasn't shallow. It was steady. Even. Then I remembered something Mallory had said earlier, almost in passing, but not quite. Hyun included a clause you might not have noticed yet. One last thing. At the time, I hadn't asked. I'd been too focused on the day's avalanche. But now, with everything filed and blocked, I pulled up the scanned file she'd sent me, page 7. There it was, in crisp legalese. In the event of conflict or misappropriation, the named executor may activate full posthumous audit authority and asset recovery rights tied to the Jernigan Foundation branches and subsidiaries, regardless of geographical jurisdiction. My heartbeat slowed, then deepened. They thought the will was just words on paper. A gesture. They had no idea it was the sword in the stone, and Hyun had already placed my hand on the hilt. First time in what felt like forever, I slept through the night. No tossing, no clutching the sheets, just silence, until the vibration of my phone broke through. I blinked at the soft morning light slipping through my curtains, groggy, unsure of what time it was. I reached over, expecting maybe a text from Mallory, a reminder about breakfast. But instead, my screen was lit up with dozens of notifications, missed calls, group texts, voicemails. And then I saw it. One headline after another flashing across my lock screen like a slow-motion explosion. Jernigan family under fire, daughter accused of diverting donor funds. I sat up, suddenly wide awake. My pulse quickened. There were screenshots of Raina at charity events, her face beaming in front of banners she never truly helped design, clutching a microphone she never earned. One clip showed her holding Hyun's framed photo, speaking about his passion for community, like she hadn't rolled her eyes every time he stayed late to finish a report. I clicked open one of the news links, my hand trembling slightly. The anchor's voice was calm, but the footage was brutal. Edited clips showing Raina at the forefront of the nonprofit's biggest moments, side by side with allegations of financial mismanagement. The comments under the video hit harder than the report itself. Another entitled pastor's kid. Fake Christian energy. She used her brother-in-law's death to raise money, and never delivered. My phone rang again. Mallory. "I'm 5 minutes away," she said, her voice urgent. "Press conference is still on, but you might want to watch the news before we go live." "I already did." She paused. "You okay?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We both knew today wasn't about being okay. It was about truth. And Hyun had made sure I'd be ready. I remembered a night that smelled like wet concrete and tension, months ago. The rain tapping against the windows of his tiny studio as I stood by the door, arms crossed, watching him scribble something furiously in his notebook. He didn't look up when he spoke. "If they ever try to erase you again, make sure the world sees everything." His voice had been low, almost like he was talking to himself more than to me. "Hyun, you sound like you're prepping for war." He finally turned, gave me a tired smile. "Not war, just clarity. Insurance." He pointed at the laptop, the folder labeled for C. I remember laughing softly, thinking he was being dramatic. "I love them," he had said, "but I don't trust them. Not anymore." That was the first time I realized how much pain he had buried under his gentleness. The first time I stopped trying to convince him that maybe things could go back to how they used to be. And now, sitting in that moment, staring at the chaos unfolding online, I didn't think he'd been paranoid at all. The community center's lobby was packed when we arrived. Reporters hovered outside the entrance, holding cameras and mics like weapons. Mallory placed a comforting hand on my back as we passed through the crowd. Inside, the podium was set. A large screen hung behind it. Rows of chairs had been arranged for the press, some already filled with familiar local faces, columnists, bloggers, even a few national stringers who smelled a scandal big enough to travel. I stood behind the podium, fingers wrapped tightly around the paper in my hand. The lights were hot. My throat felt dry. But when the hush fell over the room, I found my voice. I want to begin by acknowledging the investigation currently underway regarding misuse of funds within the Jernigan Foundation. A few cameras clicked. I held steady. My name is Callista. I am the legal executor of Hyun Lee's estate and the sole person authorized to relaunch his nonprofit vision. That decision was not made lightly. It was made months ago, by him. Mallory nodded from the side. I glanced at the screen behind me. And now, I'd like to let Hyun speak for himself. The video flickered on. There he was, alive, but only in light and sound. If you're watching this, Hyun began gently, then I'm gone. And it means Callista had to make a choice. His face was calm, clear-eyed, unapologetic. I built that foundation with good faith. I believed in our mission. But I also saw what happened when people wore masks, even if they called it family. The room was dead silent. I trust Callista because I watched her show up, when it was hard, when it was late, when no one else would. If she is here speaking, it's because truth matters more than appearances. He paused. And that's all I ever wanted for this place. Real help, no games. No politics. The screen faded to black. The questions came fast. Is Raina Jernigan being removed from the board? Did you know about the diverted funds? Will the foundation press charges? I gave short, honest answers. Nothing that would fuel more chaos, but enough to anchor the truth. Outside the room, social media lit up like wildfire. One post showed a split image, my desperate text asking for help at the airport, and Raina's cold reply, "Try Uber." The caption just said, "And y'all called her the villain?" Donations began pouring into the relaunch fund. Dozens of past donors were screenshotting their cancellation letters to the old foundation, tagging me directly. One woman wrote, "I gave $3,000 in honor of my late son. Raina used him as a marketing tool. Never again." By late afternoon, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from my mother. "This is beyond us, Callista. What are you doing to us?" My father's text came minutes later. Just 6 words. "You've disgraced our name forever." I didn't answer. Not them. Not anymore. Raina, for once, had nothing to say. Her work bio vanished by sundown. Her face was quietly scrubbed from the church's site. No explanation, no defense. I poured myself a glass of water and sat on the balcony. The city kept moving beneath me, honking, glowing, noisy as ever. But something had shifted, not outside, inside me. Hyun had told me to make sure the world saw everything. And now they had. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. The world now knew what they did, but I wasn't finished. Not yet. After the press conference, I came home and sat in silence for a long time. No news alerts, no emails, no calls, just the quiet hum of the fridge in the kitchen and the low creak of this old house settling into dusk. Then I opened Hyun's notebook. It wasn't just notes or scattered memories, it was a map, an outline, a legacy disguised as strategy. Each page was neat, handwritten in his careful block letters. Names, addresses, court case numbers, even photos. Paper-clipped to one page was a donation receipt for a family I remembered vaguely from a holiday service years ago. Hyun had helped them relocate after Raina's husband tried to illegally force them off their property. At the top of the first page, he'd written, "Start with the forgotten. End with the ones who shouted the loudest." So I did. The next morning, I drove across town to a rundown brick building that looked more like it belonged to another decade than to this one. Apartment 2C, Ms. Green. Her door opened just a crack when I knocked. I introduced myself softly, not as Jernigan, but just Callista. I was a friend of Hyun's, I said. Her eyes widened slightly behind her thick glasses. "You're the sister-in-law," she said slowly, like the words tasted bitter but familiar. "I have something for you," I replied. "From him." She let me in. Her place smelled of lavender and mothballs, the kind of scent that wraps around you like an old blanket. I sat on the edge of the floral couch while she thumbed through the envelope I handed her. It held her eviction papers, but now, attached to them, were new letters, legal referrals, statements Hyun had written before he died, detailing the forged testimony Raina had given in court that cost Miss Jewel Green her housing. Her hand trembled as she read, "He remembered me?" "He remembered everyone," I said. She put the papers down slowly. "They said I was unstable, delusional, called me a drain on the neighborhood." Her voice cracked. "I was just trying to keep the home my husband built." She touched my hand with her thin fingers. "Thank you for coming." I didn't say anything. I just sat with her until she cried. And when she finished, she handed me a teacup with chipped edges and said, "You're not like them. You sound like him." Later that day, I parked in front of a weathered bungalow just outside the city line. There was a flag out front, tattered but still hanging. The man who answered the door walked with a cane. One eye was clouded. His voice was rough but kind. "Yeah?" "Mr. Ramirez?" I asked. He nodded. "I'm here on behalf of Hyun Lee." His eyebrows pulled together. "He helped you with your VA claim, didn't he? The one Pastor Jernigan blocked because of the optics?" His jaw clenched. "Said my story would distract the congregation. Said PTSD was a personal problem." I handed him a folder. Inside were notarized letters, screenshots, even Hyun's own sworn affidavit detailing every meeting he had with Mr. Ramirez and the resources he'd funneled to help him behind the church's back. "He wanted you to have this. He wanted you to know it wasn't your fault." Ramirez swallowed hard. "He never judged me." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm here." He didn't invite me in. But when I walked back to my car, he raised one hand in a firm salute. I spent the next 2 days making visits like that, door after door, face after face. People the church had written off. Silenced, erased. Each time, I brought them what Hyun had prepared. Truth, receipts, witnesses, apologies wrapped in quiet evidence. And every time, I crossed a name off the list, until there were only a few left. And that's when I walked into the church. Not for worship, not for grace. For truth. Pastor Lewin's office hadn't changed in 20 years. Same oak bookshelves, same leather-bound Bible open to Psalms, always unread but always displayed. He looked up from his desk, startled. "Callista, you're certainly making a name for yourself this week." I didn't sit. I placed the deed on his desk, face up. "That's your signature, isn't it? Selling the old church outreach building to my father for $1? He looked down. His face didn't move. "That was a ministry realignment." "No," I said. "That was theft, disguised in faith. And you knew it." He leaned back in his chair. "Is this how you honor your brother-in-law's memory? By attacking the church?" I took a slow breath. You called Hyun a stain on God's will. His eyes narrowed. I leaned in. He forgave you, but I don't. Then I turned and walked out before he could speak another word. That night, I met Mallory in my home office. She brought a box of files, and I brought her the list. She skimmed it, nodding slowly. You ready? She asked. Always. We filed motion after motion, asset disclosures, anonymous audits. Paper trails Hyun had already traced, now made public. The shell nonprofits Raina used to hide donor money, the real estate transfers Pastor Lewin quietly facilitated, the scholarship funds that never went to students. By dawn, the first letters from the Attorney General's office had gone out, but I didn't post about it, didn't text Raina, didn't forward a single headline to my parents. Instead, I lit a candle. I sat beside Hyun's photo, and I started crossing out the final names on the list. Then, at the very bottom, in a different pen, one softer, rounder than the rest, I saw a name I hadn't expected. Callista Jernigan. Beside it, one word. Forgive. I stared at it for a long time. He knew. Somehow, he always knew. That I'd carry the weight. That I'd want to burn it all down. That I'd need reminding to let go. But not yet. And I knew Hyun had never wanted war. He wanted release. So I gave him one. The plane touched down in Incheon under a soft golden haze, like the whole sky had been brushed with quiet mourning. I didn't speak much on the ride into the village, just watched the rice fields blur past and the mountains rise in the distance like silent witnesses. The monastery stood just beyond the last paved road, nestled into the hillside where the earth still felt sacred. I carried a small duffel and the folded list, its creases now worn and fraying. Tucked in the back was the sketch Hyun had drawn years ago, a garden where the hurt could rest. I followed the winding stone path toward the temple gate. A monk sweeping the steps paused as I approached. He looked at me for a long moment, then smiled softly. You're Callista, he said in accented English. Hyun showed us your photo. He said you were his sister with a warrior's heart. I didn't know what to say. My chest tightened, but I nodded. He motioned me inside and led me to a small guest room overlooking the valley. I opened the window, letting in air that smelled of pine and rain-soaked earth. Later that afternoon, I hiked alone up the path Hyun had once described to me, winding past blooming camellias and wild persimmons. At the top was a clearing, quiet, untouched. I stood there a long time. Then I knelt and opened the urn. His ashes were lighter than I expected, like snow before it settles. I mixed them gently into the soil, kneeling in silence as the wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of something ancient. Beside the tree sapling I'd brought with me, a native oak, I buried the list. Every name, every betrayal, every proof of who he had been and who they had chosen not to see. I didn't want to carry it anymore. As I packed up the small trowel and turned to leave, I noticed a child nearby, maybe 7 or 8, watching quietly from behind a tree. She stepped forward timidly, pointing to the sapling. Was he your dad? She asked. I smiled, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. No, sweetie, he was everything good in my life. She tilted her head. Like a hero? I nodded. The kind you don't see in capes. Just kindness. She gave a little bow before running back down the hill. That night, under the soft flicker of lanterns, I sat with the monk again. We shared rice and sweet potato stew in silence until he stood and returned with a weathered envelope. This was left for you. He asked we only give it after you came here. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single handwritten page in Hyun's unmistakable print. Callista, you were never meant to carry my pain. You were the light that let me walk through it. I knew you'd find your way here, not because of revenge, but because you love things into growing again. They made you feel alone, like your heart was a fault. But you saw me. You always did. When they don't pick you up, walk your own path. And when you get there, plant something. Love you, sis. Hyun, I didn't cry right away. I just pressed the paper to my chest and let my breath slow, as if my body finally understood it could exhale. Back in the States, the noise had died down. My parents had tried reaching out, voicemails that went nowhere, emails titled, "Let's move forward." I never replied. They weren't mine to carry anymore. The nonprofit was thriving. Not flashy, not famous, just good people doing quiet work. I gave lectures once a month at the community center, and sometimes at local colleges when asked. The students called me Ms. J, and I never corrected them. With some of the settlement funds, I bought a small, single-story home by the lake, not far from where Hyun used to walk when he needed to think. It wasn't grand, but it had light. Silence, a screened porch where I could read in peace and drink my tea without watching my back. Most days, I woke early and walked the lakeside trail before breakfast. I started an artist grant in Hyun's name, one that funded murals, community gardens, and music programs for kids who'd been silenced or forgotten. That was how the world would know him, not through legal documents or headlines, but through joy. The day of the grant's first exhibition was clear and cool. I wore a soft green scarf, Hyun's favorite color, and stood quietly in the back of the local gallery as parents and teenagers filtered in, eyes wide at what they'd created. Midway through the event, a teenage girl tapped me on the arm. "My mom said Hyun saved our family," she whispered. "Thank you for not forgetting." I hugged her gently. We don't forget those we truly love. We become them. That night, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I sat on my porch and watched the lights scatter across the lake. For the first time in years, I felt the stillness not as an absence, but a homecoming. I wasn't waiting for an apology, or validation, or an invitation back into rooms I was never meant to stand in, because the truth was simple. Sometimes, when the ones who should have shown up don't, it's because your story was meant to be written without them.